So, where did you grow up and what was your childhood like?
So I grew up right outside Oslo, a small neighborhood, very safe and very, it's, I'm born in 1987, so this was the early 90s, and it's just, I think looking back, it's like a lot from my generation. I'm a millennial. It's almost absurdly idyllic, in retrospect. Um, so I had a very nice childhood. I was not very athletic, but still very active. Like we would go hiking and swimming and ride our bikes, and I would play football. And so I'm a single child or a lonely child, but my parents are divorced, so I have five now, half siblings. So, but it was a very functional divorce, and so it's always been a very like everyone's a family. It's always been a very good environment to grow up in. So yeah, and
And how were you in school? And what did you think of school?
I loved school. Yeah, I was an excellent student. I loved school. I loved reading. I would always read like 3 books at a time just to make sure there were no gaps without a book. That was my worst nightmare for my entire childhood and adolescence. It was like going so much of a day without a book was like the biggest horror I could imagine.
And Andrea, why was that such a big horror?
Not just because I loved reading,
Oh,
or I still do. It's a struggle now. So, but that was um, yeah. I would go to school, loved school, had a very went to great schools in general, great teachers, great friends. Several of my friends I've been with since I was like 6 years old. And so I would go to school, and then I would come home and I would read and read and read and read and read. So yeah.
and
Um,
what kind of topics and subjects were you reading about?
well, mostly fiction. I think yeah. By the time I was like 10, 11, I'd already read like every single book in Norwegian that my mother had in the house. So I had to start reading in English because I'd run out. So um, yeah, no, mostly fiction and a lot of like sci-fi and fantasy. Uh, Mostly, I think, in the beginning because the books are longer and they come in very big series of like 10 books of 1,000 pages each, which appealed to me, which it meant I didn't have to run out of books for a long time to come. So yeah, that was a big part of my life up until I started getting ill.
Oh, okay, so tell me about that. How old were you and what happened?
So I didn't get diagnosed with ME or myalgic encephalomyelitis until I was until 2016. But in 2006, at 19, I got an infection and another infection and another one. And over the course of 2 months, um, yeah, I had those 3 infections. And after that, like I'd never really been ill before. Up until the age of 19, I'd never really had any major illnesses or anything. I, had the normal colds, but I don't think I'd been away from school a single day in my entire life. And then over those 2 months, when I was 19, I had three infections, and after, I remember I tried to go back to the gym to go to a spinning class, and I couldn't even finish the first 15 minutes. I couldn't finish the warm up because my lung capacity was reduced by 50%. So that's where it started. Like my lung capacity was so reduced, and it improved slowly over the next year or so. But by then I was starting to have some real like issues with my stomach, a lot of stomach aches and pains, and it took like 2 years to figure out that I developed lactose intolerance, which is pretty uncommon in Scandinavia. Um, so probably a result from all the antibiotics and everything. And so I started to eat, you know, lactose free, and that improved. But by then my esophagus was inflamed and I had an ulcer, and I figured that out. But by then I had developed asthma, and I'd gone off to study at university in another city. And so it seemed like every year there was something new. I deal with one problem and another popped up, and there was a new infection, a new virus, a new something, and we'd figure it out, and I'd adjust my diet or my activity or whatever, but there was always something. And every semester I would be more tired, more exhausted, and I would crash really hard every vacation. But I mean, I was still studying full time. I was still doing a lot of volunteer work. I was still working part time and working out. Um, so it's most of the time I did really well, and I was having a blast. I loved being a student and going to university and partying, and but then the rest of the time I was, you know, struggling, and something was wrong and I couldn't figure out what it was, and it just kept coming back each semester.
So during this
So
period of time, did you have any sections in there where you were totally healthy, totally recovered, be able to do anything you wanted to physically?
I'd say yes. So this is why I don't actually think I had ME at the time. Something was obviously wrong, but I had periods of time where I was working out 8 times a week, and like going running in the morning and doing strength training in the afternoon, and school in between and work after. And so there were definitely periods that were totally fine, although they were few and far in between. I did lead a completely normal life. I just I was tired a lot of the time, and it kept getting worse. And I, yeah, there was always something. And I think by the end of 2010, I was really struggling. And the spring of 2011, I barely managed to do my coursework. But then I went to Brazil for a year to study. And that year in the warm climates with reduce the workload and just like all the afternoons spent on the beach, it did wonders. Admittedly, I started the year by having to remove my appendix, but that year in the sun really helped. And I came back to Trondheim, where I was studying, in 2012, feeling really good. And I think the fall of 2012, that's the best shape I've been in my life. I was really well trained. I was doing really well at school. This was my post-grad years, and I was doing a lot of volunteering at the student society and working and feeling it was amazing. But it lasted about 12 months. And then in 2013, I started struggling, and I finally realized that I wasn't helping. I mean, there was obviously health issues, but I wasn't helping by, like, I kept trying to push through and do more and just say yes to more things to make it happen. And so I finally started to realize I needed to slow down. But as I think a lot of people will recognize, it's one thing to understand that you have to slow down, but actually doing it is a lot harder.
So
So I'd already committed. Yeah,
maybe unpack that a little bit, because it really sounds like you're a fairly disciplined person. You had set high goals for yourself. You're a pretty high achiever. And so your habit, it sounds like, well, when things got tough, you would just try harder, and that's how you would succeed.
absolutely. I would try harder, and I would actually, whenever I was struggling, I would take on more things. Because I think, as uh, as we all know, like when you're starting something new, you have a lot of enthusiasm, and it's adrenaline, and it's fun, and you can get so far on that initial enthusiasm. So I started to use that as a lifeline. So whenever I was struggling and really exhausted and not managing, I would start something new, because then I would get that boost of enthusiasm and motivation, and that could like get me a little bit further. So I definitely had a lot on my plate, and but I also had a lot of fun. I mean, I loved being busy. Like I loved being all over the place and having a lot of responsibility, and having a say at important meetings, and doing high quality work at school. And but it was but I was spinning plates, so it was becoming impossible to keep up. um, yeah, and I'd started
So,
to sort of slow down.
yeah,
Yeah,
Andrea, I just want to discern the nuances of what you're experiencing at that time. So you're taking on more and more responsibility, and you're enjoying the things that you like to do. And at the same time, your physical energy envelope is shrinking.
absolutely. But I guess this wasn't really a new thing, because that was the way it had been for, yeah, for the last 7 years, right? It's just now, I guess it didn't end whenever the summer vacation came along. Because before, I would usually crash at the beginning of the vacation, and then I would like recover over the next 2 months, and then when the semester started, I would be fine. But
So
coming back in the fall in 2013, I wasn't recovered. I was still exhausted.
for for you, what is a crash? For the people who are maybe even not familiar with that term, for people who are living with a chronic illness, what was a
Sure.
crash experience for you?
Well, in those days, it wasn't. I think a crash now with ME is very different, because now I get a lot of post-exertional malaise and pain and migraines, and but up until that point, crashes were usually just, I guess, burnout. I would be exhausted, and lose motivation, and just sit around for a few weeks, maybe get an infection, something, and then I would slowly recover, rest up, and it would be okay. So up until that point, that was what I thought of as a crash. But it, that definition has definitely changed um, later. But in 2013, in September, I think, I went for my usual morning run, and I got about 500 meters, and my body stopped working. And I crawled home, and that afternoon, I had my first migraine. And it lasted 5 days. And it's to this day, it's the worst migraine I've ever had. And that was my first like ME like crash. I was paralyzed for 5 days in so much pain. It's like there was nothing else existed except the pain. So that's what I consider like the start of what later became ME, I think.
So that must have been very frightening to, go out for a run, feeling A-okay, and then feeling so sick 500 meters into it, barely able to get home, and then to experience multiple days of incredible migraine pain, which you had not experienced before. So what were you doing in terms of seeking healthcare?
You're right. It was extremely scary, especially the run and just feeling my body just, I didn't collapse. I couldn't take another step. And it was really frightening. I'd never experienced anything like it. I mean, I'd gotten really tired and had runs I didn't complete, whatever, but I'd never experienced like my body just completely shutting down like that. During the migraine, I didn't really think about anything except the pain. And then when I recovered, I felt totally fine. So I sort of forgot about it. And it's weird, but when you're not aware that something, I don't know, I was maybe so relieved to feel okay that I was just so focused on getting back to my everyday life that I sort of almost, I pushed it back. But then it happened again. Another month or so later, when the semester was getting to a close, I had another one, and then I went to the doctor because I realized that this is not good and not normal, and I won't be able to finish all my courses this semester, so I needed a doctor's note. But I mean, my doctor and I, we sort of agreed that it was probably stress and overwork, and I got a note from her, and I went back and I sort of scraped together my projects and classes, and then I moved back to Oslo to write my thesis, and there was a lot of stuff going on. I was working, I was moving, I was starting a design studio with some friends because, why not do more? And by the time I settled down to focus on my thesis, I collapsed. And and that was the first time I really, I couldn't open my computer in the morning. I couldn't do anything. And it took me a year
And so
to recover enough.
how come you couldn't open your computer? What was stopping you?
At that point, it was exhaustion. I think both physical and cognitive. At that time, I was pretty sure I was burned out. It made sense to me. I'd had a lot to do, and I'd heard of others who were burned out. And
So you go with that diagnosis, hey, I'm burned out, I just need to rest, and I'll be recovered and back to my usual self.
And to be fair, I did improve a lot in the next year. And I went back to finish my master project. And I did. I scraped it together. I maybe in 25% of the time I was expected to use, but I did it. And I was thinking like, hey, great. I'm really on my way to recovery. I'm doing everything right. I was sleeping again. I met my current partner at that time. So everything was really looking up. And I was like, okay, yeah, it was definitely burnout. I'm improving. I'm doing great. And I think this is very recognizable for a lot of people because I'd been so low the year before. The fact that I managed to finish my thesis, even if it was at like 25%, felt like being completely well. Like that felt like enough. And I mean, obviously it wasn't, but that's how it felt, just compared to the despair of the earlier year. So I did that, and I was thinking like, yeah, everything is going up, everything is gonna be fine. I'm gonna go back to work, and I'm gonna like exercise more, and I'm gonna like slowly build up, and it's all gonna be fine. and it didn't. I went back to work. It lasted 3 weeks, and it was over. And I went to my doctor, and I said, like, this time I'm not getting better. I'm not. Last year I slowly got better, but now it's not getting better. And that's so in 2016, I think he said, well, have you considered that you might have chronic fatigue syndrome? And I hadn't really done that, but we started to look at that. And at the same time, I went to the chiropractor because I was very locked up between my shoulder blades, and I had a severe immunological reaction to that adjustment.
Oh, tell me more about that.
I was very locked up between my shoulder blades, and that's from a lot of things, probably from a lot of studying, sitting hunched over, but also a lot of stress, and I'd had some trouble with my breathing patterns. It's like a leftover from when I had asthma, and it all just sort of built up, and it was getting really painful. So I went to this really great chiropractor. He's actually really good, and he warned me that this is very locked up, so you'll probably have a reaction. Most people have a reaction the first time they come. It lasts 2 to 3 days, and but it'll pass. And so we did the adjustment, and I got really sick. And I was actually sick for almost 2 months.
And what sort of symptoms?
Flu-like. Very flu-like, and my back was extremely painful, and it got swollen. Like my entire back was swollen and red, and I would lie like in bed at night screaming because it was so painful, and my partner would put ice on my back to calm it down, and as the pain calmed down, like the flu-like feeling stuck with me. So for almost 2 months, I was feeling really, really sick.
And what was your chiropractor saying about this?
Well, after the first reaction, he sent me straight to the doctor. He was like, I'm not touching you until a doctor has looked at this and said it's okay. And a doctor looked at it and was like, I don't see anything. So I went back, and gradually, actually, the chiropractor helped the issues that he'd started on. He could gradually improve. And to this day, it's a lot better. But the flu-like feeling stuck. And from that point, it was pretty clear that I had ME. Because it was sort of ironic, really, that my doctor had started me saying, like, I think we should consider CFS. But by the time we finished the evaluation, I definitely had ME, which is, like, in Norway at least, considered sort of two separate things.
Okay.
Chronic fatigue or it's ME. So,
and how are they categorized differently? What makes chronic fatigue syndrome different from ME in Norway?
Well, I think chronic fatigue syndrome is used to describe a lot of things based around chronic fatigue, and it's chronic fatigue without any other explanation. Almost the same as ME. It's just that to get an ME diagnosis, you need to fulfill the Canada criteria. So it's a lot more than just fatigue. It's post-exertional malaise, it's pain, it's sleep issues, So it's a more specific diagnosis.
Okay. So what was it, how did it feel to get that diagnosis?
Well, I mean, in a way, I already knew it was true. You know, I'm resourceful, and I'm a nerd. So the first thing I did when this came up was read all about it. And so I already knew. It was to me, it made perfect sense. And I mean, I could check every symptom. So it was pretty clear to me. So getting the diagnosis from the specialist was mostly a relief just to get it done. But then, of course, and at that time, I think my doctor said, well, most people, not many get totally well, but most people will improve enough to like get back to a normal life within 5 to 7 years. So I was like, okay, that makes sense. I like that's, and I think actually as a starting point, that's not a bad place to start. If you're gonna start with you'll never get well, that's not. I'm not sure that's helpful. You need some time to sort of get into it. And I mean, some people do improve enough to get back to at least the partial, like part-time work. So
it sounds like there wasn't any attempt to label your symptoms as being purely psychological, that there was an acknowledgement that there was something, physically wrong with you.
Well, I don't think anyone ever said anything to one degree or the other. I mean, I'd already gone to a psychologist because I had been burned out, or at least believed I was. So I'd already been down that road. So I was sort of already processed through that part of the system. And so everyone, like every doctor I spoke to would be like, oh yeah, but the psychologist doesn't think there's anything psychologically wrong with you. So that's fine. Well, most doctors don't really know a lot about ME or CFS. And I think, and to be honest, there's not a lot to know. So I think they just sort of, they don't, but I was very lucky in that all the doctors that I had to deal with in this regard just didn't pass judgments one way or the other. They like, yeah, you're obviously sick. We believe that you're actually trying to get better and you're not having any success doing it. You're highly educated, you're articulate. We believe you. It's probably like, we don't know what to do about it, but yeah, I've been very lucky in that regard. Absolutely.
Now, I know that in Norway, and you're going to have to maybe explain that to us, to be eligible for disability support payments through the government, you're required to participate in a rehab program?
Yes. Well, officially, no. It's this stems from the national guidelines for chronic fatigue syndrome and myalgic encephalomyelitis in Norway. And the guidelines, they recommend that patients attend a rehab facility. And it's actually called a work-related rehab facility. Because in most instances, the goal is to get you closer to be able to work or to work more. And this is something that's available to most people with chronic disease and also people that have been in accidents or whatever, that for some reason or other need to learn to adapt to a new way of life. And so it's a recommendation along with a management class. And I guess it's a requirement to offer us the rehab, but legally, they're not allowed to demand that you do anything that could make you worse. On paper, they can't make you do it. In reality, it's not that simple. Most of us start out going on a temporary benefit, like an unemployment benefit, but it's geared towards those of us that are too ill to work. And it's something to be on while they figure out if you can get back to work or not, right? To be able to apply for permanent disability benefits, you have to check a long list of boxes. And those boxes are taken from the guideline, and typically it's diagnosis by a specialist, preferably a secondhand opinion. psychological evaluation. Well, for ME, treatment is not really, there's no treatment. So it's mostly rest, and then there's the management class and or the rehab, as well as the work assessments. There are several divisions of the work and pension department that evaluate these applications. It's the local offices that recommend that you apply. My caseworker, she's a really sweet and really helpful young lady, she's about my age. and if my doctor told her that, no, Andrea is not well enough to go to a rehab center, she would probably be okay. Then if you're not well enough, we can't make you, so then I'll recommend you apply for a benefit or disability benefit. The application would then be sent to another division that would process it. Sometimes they accept whatever is in the application. I've heard that people, they have just the diagnosis and nothing else, and it still gets accepted. But mostly, if you haven't checked all the boxes, they automatically deny it. And then you can appeal. And most people will win the appeal. It's just that the appeal will take 6 to 12 months. And during those 6 to 12 months, you're not eligible for any kind of benefit. So if you don't check all the boxes, and that means if you haven't been to rehab before you apply, your application will most likely be denied, and you can appeal, and the appeal is quite likely to be successful. It's just that you'll be 6 to 12 months without any income.
Wow.
Yeah.
So just so I'm clear here, so people that are very sick and disabled and they're needing to transfer from short-term disability to long-term permanent disability, the typical response of the government is to deny the initial application and cut off payments during the appeal process. And most people succeed in the appeal process, but by that time, they may be out of food, out of home, out of medication.
Yep. So in my case, and you have the rules have been changed. So the temporary benefits are pretty time limited. To begin with, it's hard to get everything done in the time frame they've set. And in my case, my doctor have always agreed with me that I'm not well enough to go to one of these rehab centers. I mean, I would survive, but it's geared towards those who are pretty mild and who can walk a little, who can socialize every day without, collapsing. And so we've always agreed that I'm not well enough. And not only would I not benefit, I would most likely get worse, at least temporarily, but a lot of people also get worse permanently. And they do take a lot of care while you're there. They have soundproofed rooms. It's always like the best centers are really ME friendly as far as they can, but it's still, for most of us, just being away from home is too much, right? So even if you can stay in bed all day, even if you still have to be around other people, and there's still appointments, and you have to eat in the common room, and it's just to travel there, it's 3 hours. It's too much for me. I will definitely survive it. It's just not ideal, and it will almost definitely make me worse.
So it might be hard for healthy people to sort of understand how a 3-hour car trip to the rehab center could knock you down.
Absolutely. And I know some people with ME don't struggle with this, but I think most of us do. And I'm not sure exactly why a car travel or bus travel or anything is so draining. Vibrating, and there's sounds, and visually it's very stimulating. And I mean, in the summer when I'm usually a lot milder in the summer. I can handle maybe 2 hours if I have a lot of painkillers beforehand, and if I know there's at least a week until I have to do it again. But if I do get really, really ill from it, it will trigger some pretty severe post-exertional malaise. So it's not ideal, but I mean the stay is 4 weeks, so I'll probably recover from that. I mean, so my doctor have always agreed that that won't be beneficial for me, and we've also thought that it's maybe better too to have it like for some time I might need it more, or when it will be appropriate. So like, let's not waste it on me now when I can't really benefit, and I do manage my disease well, and I've learned like all I need to know about pacing and etc. So I do really well on my own, so I don't feel like I need it, and I don't think it will help me. So my dilemma is, do I go and risk getting worse, but then I will check that box and I will have the report because that's the point, is sort of the report that they write that gives them a better, like, they can document the level of functioning you're actually at, right? They can observe you over 4 weeks, and that's very helpful when you apply for disability. But so do I do that, or do I not go and like not risk getting worse, but then I definitely risk going 12 months without an income? And I'm very lucky and very fortunate in that my mother had a disability insurance on me, which increases because I was a student when I get ill, my benefits are pretty low. It's the minimum amount. But because of the insurance, it's 50% higher. And so I'm actually able to save enough to make sure I have enough to live off for a year. It's still not a very good situation to be in, to be without an income for 12 months. And I mean, my income is pretty low to begin with. So it's not an ideal situation. And of course, for many people, that's not possible to save, right? Many people with ME especially, they don't have the ability to save anything. They're barely like surviving as it is. Some people have young children, and they might have a husband or wife who's also ill or who's also has a low income. So I mean, like, legally, they can't make you do anything that will make you worse. But in reality, that's just what they're doing.
That is a horrible choice. Do you participate in a month-long rehab, and I'll put that in quotes, that's in all likelihood going to make you sicker and potentially permanently sicker, in order to sort of get access to benefits which you're really entitled to?
Exactly. And so, I mean, some people have doctors that really understand the disease and can write really good reports, and then they might be able to sort of sideline this. But for me, I just moved back to where I grew up. I have a new doctor. She doesn't know me that well. So, and she doesn't really get ME. She's very like respectful and understanding, but she doesn't have a lot of experience with it. So it's hard for her to sort of evaluate this for me. She doesn't know me well enough, right? So, and I mean, I could take a chance that it'll work out, but.
So in the context of medical error, it would seem that the rehab program for ME has an error in assuming that the program is going to rehab somebody with ME.
Yes, or actually, like, to be fair, I think it's very helpful to a lot of people with ME. If you have a mild form of the condition, or if you're very recently diagnosed, it is very helpful to a lot of people because they will teach you a lot about pacing and about managing your illness in all the different kinds of ways. And you do have like doctors and physiotherapists and everything under one roof. And it's, I know a lot of people actually find it helpful, and a lot of people with young children too do actually love this chance to be away and recover for a few weeks. And I don't think actually anyone believes anymore that it will improve you, that you will get better from it. I think it's a chance to discover that you might have something different. I think mostly it's that the Department of Work and Pensions really need something to help them make the decision, and they don't understand what they're asking. So it's more that they're not fully comprehending what it's doing to us. We try to tell our caseworkers, but they're not the ones making decisions, right? They're just the front line, and they're as frustrated as anyone else. So like my caseworker, she said like, oh yeah, I see here it says you haven't been because you're too ill, but I just have to tell you, it will really help your case. It's up to you, but from experience, it will make your life a lot harder if you don't go. So if you can't, you can't, but I'd really recommend it if you can at all manage it, right?
So I think I understand the error in the Norwegian system, or at least in this little part of the
Yeah,
system, and it's that like you say, the government doesn't understand ME, therefore they're not asking the right questions, or they're not setting up an appropriate program for people with ME.
right.
And that's where the
Exactly.
error is in the system.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's exactly it. And it's frustrating. Because I realize they do need some sort of evaluation or something to help them judge like if you're actually ill or how ill you are. But I think this is a very, very expensive way to not really accomplish what you're trying to accomplish. I mean, 4 weeks at a center like this, it must cost so much. And I think they might be better served by sending someone home to your home to interview you. Who wants a stranger in your house to evaluate you and judge you? But still, it would be better than 4 weeks.
I've talked to a number of folks in the UK, and they have that system where the social worker will come to the ill person's home to make an assessment. And it doesn't seem to work out too well in the UK. Now, they may have different set of rules and recommendations and way they're implementing that particular protocol, and maybe that's the problem, as opposed to just visiting a sick person in their home.
Yes, well, I don't think that's an ideal solution. It's just, there has to be a better way, right? There has to be, or at least, I guess if ME was better understood, then maybe you could have, then maybe more centers could have receive people with ME, because now it's like there's, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 centers across the country that receives people, or maybe it's more, but a lot of them are not recommended by the ME Association. So yeah, the way it's done now, where you don't really have a choice, and it's really, there's only one way, like there's only one size fits all. And I think, like most of us know, for people with ME, that doesn't work well.
Yeah, it requires a big system change. So, Andrea, how have you been managing yourself, your emotions, your thoughts during this period when you had so many hopes and dreams, working towards achieving them, and now you don't have those same hopes and dreams? So how do you deal with that?
Well, I mean, it's an up and down sort of battle. I mean, the our family motto, or my mother's motto rather, has always been like, it won't help being angry about it, right? Or it won't help being like in a bad mood, which I think is true. It's not always helpful to see it that way, but that's what I keep coming back to. Like, okay, this is the way it is, and I'm angry about it, and I'm sad about it, and I'm really, really hoping it won't last forever. But while I'm here, you just sort of have to make the best you can out of it, right? You have to adjust. What I keep going back to after every like bad period or after every breakdown or whatever is, okay, if this is the way it is forever and always, like, what do I want to do about it? Or not do about it, but what do I want to do with my life given the situation I'm in? And so, at least for the time being, it's pretty impossible for me to work. I do try sometimes to do like small things. I've done some translations online, stuff like that. But I mean, it's I have some pretty significant cognitive issues, so it usually doesn't last long. But I try to focus on managing my finances so that although I don't have a lot now, maybe in the future I will have more room. Like, just because my income's low is not a reason to sort of give up trying to save some of it, right? I do have a partner, and we are building a life together. So that's amazing, actually. That for except for my health and the fact that I don't work, everything else is pretty much as good as it gets, I think. My partner is amazing, and we have a really great life together. And we bought a house now this fall, and I mean, we're looking towards the future, and there's still a future, right? It's not the one I thought I would have or the one I wanted necessarily, but there's a lot of good stuff in it. And I am very fortunate in so many ways. I mean, I've been born and brought up in one of the richest, happiest countries on earth, with a welfare system that's very generous compared to a lot of other places. I have a great family that have been very supportive, and I don't think everyone understands what's going on, maybe, but no one has doubted me or told me to get a grip, except for my very aging grandmother who thinks the baby will probably solve everything. But that's grandmothers for you. And I have my friends who have also been very supportive. So I think I keep trying to remind myself that I do actually have a lot going for me. And that, this all sucks, but it's, if you just don't think too much about it, it's, the rest of it is pretty okay, right? And I think I'll find something to do sometime, yeah.
It sounds like you've got a certain level of acceptance of your new reality, but you've not given up hope of having some sort of meaning in your future. Buying a house represents hope, planning, future.
Yeah, definitely. I've not given up hope. I think even if I have this illness for the rest of my life, and even if there's never any treatment that will help, I'm mostly pretty stable. I know that every summer my level of functioning improves a lot. So I'm still mostly housebound in the summer, but I can leave the house maybe twice a week instead of once a month, and I can be outside, and I can maybe garden a little bit. So I know, like, even if things are always a bit heavy in the winter, there's always like an improvement to look forward to. And I think that's maybe the best part of having this sort of relapsing and remitting kind of ME, is that even if, I know it will get worse, it will also always get better, which I think helps for the hope part. My condition has become more and more steady and predictable. And so I haven't given up hope completely that I will improve a little bit. I have so far, just from pacing and I mean, it's not a lot, but it's still, you know, it's going in the right direction. We have adjusted and we want to, well, hopefully we want to have a family. Well, so far we're not sure we'll manage. Something to think about. And just so long as we sort of adjust for having to do it a little bit differently, yeah, I think we'll be fine.
Yeah, probably more support. So if you improve in the summertime and you had the big recovery and improvement when you lived in Brazil for a year, what do you think that's about? And how strongly do you have the urge to move to Brazil?
Oh, it's pretty strong. I think it's several things. I think it's the sunlight. I think it's the warmth I think that improves circulation. I think that reduces pain. It aids recovery. So you know, you can, even if you'll recover faster and you can do a little bit more. And I mean, it's not a huge difference, but it's we went to Spain a couple of years ago for a couple of weeks, and I mean, I could walk to the nearby restaurants, right? We even managed to walk through the city center one day, even if we had to like take a coffee break every 10 minutes. So I think it's lots of things, and it really does help. And so what we're discussing is my partner, he runs his own company, and so he's building his company and he has a lot to do. But in a couple of years, he'll probably sell it. And at that time, I'm probably through with all the disability stuff. So what we're discussing is going for at least maybe a few months, maybe longer. Southern Europe, probably, like not too far, and just do what they call a mini retirement and see how that works. So, I mean, if we're lucky, maybe I improve enough that I can work a little, right? And maybe that's motivation enough to stay there, or at least stay there in the winter months, or do it every year or every other year or whatever. So it's something we think about, but I mean, we do all have all our family and friends in Norway, so yeah, there's that to consider too.
Mm-hmm. So we've been chatting for about an hour now. How much, if at all, is this conversation going to take out of you, and how long will it take you to recover?
Oh, it's hard to say. Like, I'm pretty drained now. I don't know if you can see it, but I'm barely keeping my eyes open.
Yeah.
I think when you're doing something like this, adrenaline helps a lot. It keeps you afloat. I'll probably be pretty out of it for tonight, but I did prepare. I have rested all the entire day, and I've stayed in bed, and I do that mostly this time of year anyway. But I've tried to avoid doing too much stimulating activities, like too much reading or too much anything. So I'll probably be pretty wired for a while now. And then I'm guessing I'm not going to feel too good tomorrow.
Well, thank you for making the sacrifice. I hope folks who hear your story, regardless if they live in Norway or not, will recognize maybe their own symptoms and history, and maybe can seek out support as you have.
My pleasure. Well, I mean, I think a lot of us have confusing and like long, troubled roads before we get to a diagnosis. So I think that's something many recognize.
Yeah. Wouldn't it be nice to have a really recognizable, well-diagnosed, well-treated disease?
Yeah, that would be great. Oh, yeah, and I mean, in a way, I'm also jealous of the people that have ME but who got it overnight. I mean, that seems so clear cut, but I don't think it's any better in the. At least I think it's probably harder to learn to deal with.
With the slow onset, harder to deal with.
No, the other way around. The slow onset sort of prepares you for that something's not right? Something's got to give. If it happens overnight, I don't know how you deal with that.
Yeah, it is more shocking, more traumatic to have sudden onset. That's true.
I think so, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. I want you to rest hard.
I will. You too, Scott.
Okay.